An Apache woman was left to die, until a lone cowboy carried her through the winter. Snow had swallowed the trail by the time he found her. She lay half-buried beneath a drift, her breath a thin cloud rising against the wind. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, only that her hand still twitched toward the fading light. He could have walked on, no law would have stopped him. But something in the way her fingers trembled, clutching the frozen air like it still meant mercy, made him drop to his knees. The cold cut through his coat, through his bones, through every reason he'd had for being alone. He lifted her, skin ice-burned, pulse faint, and the storm howled like it wanted her back. The cabin he'd taken for the season was miles away, buried deep in pine and silence. If he carried her, he'd risk his horse, his supplies, his own life. Still, he muttered, "Easy now," and pulled her close. Snow spilled from her hair as she whispered something he couldn't catch, something that sounded like, "Don't let them find me." The wind didn't wait for his answer. It rose like a living thing, erasing their tracks as fast as he could make them. By the time he reached the cabin, his hands had gone numb. Her weight no longer felt like burden but promise. He kicked open the door, fire dead, walls cracked, and laid her by the hearth. Her skin was almost translucent, her lips cracked from frostbite. He rubbed her wrists, struck a match, and fed the flame with what was left of his map. Smoke curled, soft and stubborn. He leaned close, murmuring, "You hold on, here." Her eyes flickered. Then, faintly, she breathed, "They said I wouldn't make it past the ridge." He frowned. "Who said that?" No answer, only the crackle of wet wood. Outside, the wind shifted, dragging across the door like claws. He turned toward the sound, slow, wary, hand hovering near his revolver. The firelight flared once, then dimmed. He looked back at her. Her eyes were open now, wide, alert, staring at something behind him. A single thud echoed on the door, then another, and another. The storm had brought company. Wind hammered the cabin walls as he pushed another log into the fire. The flame spat and hissed, struggling to stay alive, much like the woman on the floor beside him. Her breath came in shallow pulls, eyelids fluttering like she was fighting some unseen weight pressing her down. He unwrapped his coat, draped it over her shoulders, and watched her shiver underneath it. "Ain't much, but it's warm," he muttered. His voice sounded strange in the small room, too soft for a man who hadn't spoken to another soul in months. She stirred, whispering something again. He leaned closer. "Don't take me back." Her words were fragile but sharp enough to cut through the hiss of the storm. He frowned. "Ain't taking you anywhere, you're safe here." But even as he said it, he knew the lie of it. No one was safe this high up. Not in this cold, not with the snow sealing the valley like a coffin lid. And whoever she feared, if they were human, they were worse than the weather. He rose, checking the shutters, tightening the bar across the door. His horse stamped outside, restless, nostrils blowing steam. Somewhere in the distance, a low howl rolled through the dark, part wolf, part something else. He crouched back beside her, holding a tin cup to her lips. "Drink slow," the woman sipped, coughed, then blinked up at him through lashes crusted with frost. You're alone." He nodded. "By choice. Then why me?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "Maybe I got tired of watching things die." She looked at him for a long moment, a look that carried both thanks and warning, then turned her face toward the fire. Outside, snow fell harder, drumming against the roof. He reached for his rifle, propped by the door, the habit of a man who'd lived too long without trusting silence. But this silence wasn't empty, it was listening. She winced suddenly, gripping her side. Blood had seeped through the bandages he'd wrapped earlier. Darker now, sluggish but steady. He tore a strip from his sleeve and pressed down. She didn't cry out, just whispered, "They'll see the smoke." He froze. "Who?" She swallowed hard. "Men who wear blue. Said they'd finish what the cold started." He stared at her, realization tightening his throat. Soldiers, the kind who didn't call what they did killing. They called it clearing ground. He threw another blanket over her and moved toward the window. Through the warped glass, He could barely make out shapes moving between the trees. Not close, not yet. But there. How far behind? He asked. She turned her head, eyes flicking to the rifle. Long enough for you to leave me. He looked at her, really looked. The cracked lips, the half-frozen hands, the way she met his gaze without asking for pity. Then he shook his head. Ain't how I was raised. Her brow furrowed. You were raised for mercy? No, he said quietly. For debt. He poured powder into the rifle chamber and blew out the lamp. Darkness swallowed the room except for the thin orange pulse of the fire. Outside, a twig snapped. Then a second. He took position by the window, whispering without turning back. You move when I say. The wind dropped for half a heartbeat, the stillness before a fuse burns through. And then the door rattled once, twice. A voice shouted through the storm, muffled and harsh. Open up! Cabins requisitioned for the army! The woman's eyes widened. He didn't answer. The knock came again, harder this time. By order of the Union! He cocked the rifle. The fire flared, casting both their shadows on the back wall, and one kneeling, one standing. A third knock. Then silence. The woman's whisper broke it. They'll burn you too. He looked at her, jaw set. Let 'em try. Outside, something shifted in the dark, the scrape of boots against frozen earth, the click of a rifle bolt being drawn. Inside, the cowboy drew a long breath and said, almost softly, Guess the winter just found its teeth. Snow thickened around the cabin until the world shrank to a white blur. The wind screamed like something alive, and the cowboy knew the storm was only hiding worse things beneath it. He stood by the door, rifle ready, breath shallow. The Apache woman's eyes followed his every move, her face half lit by the fire that trembled against the draft. They won't leave, she said quietly. He didn't answer. Outside, a shape moved and slow, deliberate, like a man testing the dark. Then another voice, older, colder, cut through the howl. You in there, cowboy. We're not here for you. Just hand over the woman. The cowboy didn't move. He'd heard that tone before. Men who smiled while killing, calling it law. He leaned closer to the firelight, whispering, You said soldiers. These ain't just soldiers, are they? She hesitated, her hand tightening around the edge of the blanket. They were once. Now they hunt for pay. Bounty hunters. Her silence was answer enough. The cowboy exhaled, long and heavy. Figures. Outside, the snow crunched under approaching boots. He could hear at least 3, maybe 4, but the storm swallowed their rhythm, made them ghosts. The woman pushed herself up on one elbow, pain sharp in her breath. They'll burn the cabin. You should go. He shook his head. Ain't how I do things. They'll kill you for me. He rechecked the chamber, voice flat. Then they'll learn I shoot back. A silence hung, heavy as the snow, piling on the roof. Then, a single gunshot shattered it. Glass exploded from the window. The bullet buried itself in the beam beside his head. He ducked low, grabbed the fire poker, and shoved it into the coals till it glowed red. Another voice outside, mocking. Still breathing, red woman. Cowboy's doing you no favor. Come out now and we'll make it quick. The cowboy's jaw tightened. He looked at her. You can stand? She nodded faintly. Enough to aim. He tossed her a small revolver from his belt. Use it only if they step through the door. She caught it with a shaking hand, eyes fierce beneath exhaustion. He kicked over the table, dragged it in front of the window and crouched behind it. The firelight flickered against the floorboards, shadows trembling like nerves. For a few seconds, the world was just breath and snow. Then the door burst open. One man stumbled through, rifle raised, eyes squinting against the dark. The cowboy fired first. The man fell backward, hit the snow, silent. Down! He shouted. The woman dropped flat as 2 more bullets tore through the walls. The fire hissed as sparks rained across the floor. Another shape loomed in the doorway, broad shoulders, a scar cutting down his face. He held a torch. Come on out, hero, he growled. Ain't worth dying for her kind. The cowboy stepped out from cover, rifle steady. Only kind worth dying for's the one left behind. The man sneered. Then freeze with her. He hurled the torch. Flames licked across the floor, catching dry bark and paper. Smoke climbed fast. The heat hit like a fist. The woman coughed, eyes watering. "The back door!" He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the rear wall, but a bullet shattered the frame. Trapped. The cowboy turned, face red from heat and fury. "You got one chance to leave," he shouted into the storm. No answer, only laughter. Then a sound cut through it all. A low growl. From behind the cabin, through the drifting smoke, a dog appeared. Then another. Strays, half-starved mountain hounds he'd fed scraps 2 weeks ago. Now, teeth bared, they circled the men outside. The hunters hesitated. One fired into the snow, missing. The dogs lunged. The cowboy seized the moment, shoving the woman through the half-broken wall. They stumbled into the cold, the world exploding behind them as fire ate through the roof. They ran, across snow that reached their knees, through smoke that stung their lungs. Behind them, shouts turned to screams, the kind that never lasted long. When they finally stopped, the cabin was a red smear in the distance. The woman collapsed, coughing, trembling. He knelt beside her, brushing snow from her face. "You alive?" She nodded. "Barely. You should have left me." He looked back at the flames, then at her. "Winter don't take orders from me, but neither do I." She met his eyes, something new flickering there, not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. He helped her to her feet. "There's an old mine up ahead. We'll hole up till dawn." She leaned against him, whispering, "They'll come again." He adjusted her weight on his arm, eyes narrowing toward the horizon. "Then we'll make sure there's nothing left to find." The storm swallowed them both, 2 figures against a world of white, their footprints already vanishing into the wind. Snow followed them like a living thing, biting at their backs as they climbed through the dark. The wind carried smoke from the burning cabin, the smell of pitch and ash chasing them through the ravine. The cowboy held the woman close as they moved, each step sinking knee-deep in drifts. The night pressed heavy, silent but for their ragged breathing and the occasional echo of a cracking branch behind them. Finally, they reached the mouth of an old mine, half buried, its entrance framed by rot and frost. He swept the snow from a support beam and struck flint until a spark caught the dry moss inside. A dull flame flickered to life, small but stubborn. The woman slumped beside it, her eyes glassy. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "You shouldn't have come this far." He crouched beside her, pulling his coat tighter around her shoulders. "You'd be dead if I hadn't." "Maybe that's what they wanted," she said, staring into the fire. "Maybe that's what I wanted too." He studied her face, the bruises, the half-healed cuts, the look of someone who'd been running long before the snow fell. "You're not built for dying," he said quietly. "You fought too hard to end it in a drift." Her gaze flicked to him. "You talk like you know me." He sat back against the stone, rubbing the cold from his hands. "Don't need to know you. The world don't leave folks much choice. Fight or freeze." For a long time, neither spoke. The mine creaked around them, wind sighing through cracks like something alive. Outside, the storm began to ease, but not the unease inside. Then she said, almost to herself, "They called me a thief." He looked up. "What did you steal?" "Nothing," she said, her voice brittle. "Not until they came. They wanted our horses, our grain. I said no. They said it wasn't a request." He frowned. "Army?" She shook her head slowly. "Not anymore. They wear the coats, but not the creed. They trade flesh for silver, land for whiskey." He ran a hand through his hair, jaw tight. "Figures. War ends, and all that's left is men who don't know how to stop taking." Her eyes lifted to meet his. "They killed my brother when he refused to sign their paper, said it was for peace. Then they left me tied to a post, said the storm would judge if I was worth saving." He stared into the fire. "Guess the storm passed its verdict." She leaned forward, whispering, "Why did you help me?" He hesitated. "Had a sister once. Same eyes, same look before the fever took her. Sometimes you see a ghost and you just move without thinking." She was silent for a long time, then said softly, "Your ghost saved me." He looked up sharply. "Don't thank me yet. We ain't clear. Those men don't stop easy." She nodded, gaze falling back to the fire. "Then we finish it before they find us again." He studied her, the steadiness returning to her voice, the faint defiance rising through exhaustion. "You got a plan?" "Yes," she said. "But it starts with you leaving me." He barked a short, humorless laugh. "You got a bad habit of telling me to do what I won't." She looked at him, steady now, no tremor, no plea. "If they see you with me, they'll hunt you too. There's a way they won't look." He leaned closer. "Which is—" She reached into the folds of her blanket and pulled out a small iron seal, circular, blackened by fire. This was theirs, the mark they used to claim land and lives. "I took it before I ran." He stared at it. "You stole their seal. I took back what they used to burn my home." He nodded slowly. "Now they want it back." Her hand tightened around the seal. "They'll chase it till one of us is dead." He stood, walking to the cave mouth. The snow had stopped, the moon cutting pale light across the drifts. "Then we make sure it ain't you." She watched him, her breath steadying. "You'd kill for a stranger." He didn't turn. "Ain't killing, just settling a debt that don't belong on paper." Behind them, the mine groaned again, old timbers creaking, as if the earth itself was restless with what it heard. He turned back toward her, eyes narrowing at the faint red glow of the dying fire. "We move at dawn. Storm will hide our tracks till then." She nodded, tucking the seal close to her chest. "They won't stop." He glanced out into the night. "Neither will I." The wind rose again, brushing snow from the ridge, and far below, in the valley, the faint flicker of torches began to move. The hunters hadn't turned back. They were coming. The next morning broke pale and sharp, a grey light crawling over the mountains, cold enough to sting the lungs. The cowboy was already awake, standing at the mine's edge, with his rifle slung low and frost in his beard. The woman stirred behind him, clutching the iron seal close. Her body ached, but the fire inside her, and the one that had outlasted soldiers and storms, still burned. He glanced back. "You can walk," she nodded. "I've done worse." "Then we move fast. They're trailing us." She rose slowly, wrapping his coat tighter around herself. "You said they wouldn't stop." "I did," he said, "and I don't lie about devils." They stepped into the open, the snow crunching beneath their boots. The valley stretched wide below them, empty, silent, too still for comfort. For a while they didn't speak. The only sound was wind scraping over rock, the echo of ravens circling somewhere unseen. Then she said, "You ever lose something you couldn't bury?" He glanced at her. "Every man who's still breathing has—" She looked at him then, not as the stranger who saved her, but as someone walking a road as haunted as hers. "Then you know what I mean." He didn't reply, just adjusted his rifle strap and kept walking. They crossed a narrow ridge where the snow had thinned. Tracks followed theirs, boot marks half filled with fresh powder. The cowboy crouched, touched the edge. Still soft. "They're close." She stiffened. "How many?" He scanned the slope. 4, maybe 5. The kind that ain't used to missing meals. "They won't stop until they have the seal." He looked at her, voice low. "What's it worth?" She hesitated. "Land, water, names." He frowned. "Names?" She met his gaze. "Every Apache family west of the river, they used this seal to mark their lands and their graves." He swore under his breath. "So it ain't just a stamp." "It's a map," she said, "and a death list." The cowboy tightened his grip on the rifle. "Then we're not running anymore." Her eyes flashed. "You think we can fight them all?" He shrugged. "I think the land owes them a few ghosts." They reached the tree line just as a distant shout broke the stillness. She turned, eyes wide. "They've seen us." "Good," he said. "Saves me the trouble of looking." He moved fast, pulling her toward a rocky outcrop that overlooked the frozen creek below. The drop was steep, but the ridge gave cover. "We hold here," he said. She crouched beside him, breathing hard. "What if they circle? Then they'll meet the same end from both sides." She looked at him and the calm, the quiet steel in his voice, and realized this man didn't fight for glory. He fought because no one else would. A gunshot cracked through the trees, close. Snow burst beside her face. She flinched but didn't cry out. The cowboy leaned over, aiming low. One shot. A scream followed, brief, echoing. Another bullet whistled past, chipping stone. He muttered, "They're fanning out." They'll come from both ridges, she said. He nodded. Then we make 'em think we're running. How? He reached into his coat, pulled out a piece of mirror, cracked, small. He caught the morning light and flashed it toward the far ridge, then dropped it. That'll draw two off. Rest'll follow noise. She understood. And we hit what's left. He gave a faint smile. Now you're speaking my language. The wind cut sharper as they waited. The trees whispered like old bones. Then, the first hunter broke from the slope, musket glinting. The cowboy fired once. The man fell. Two more moved in fast, shouting, boots breaking ice. The woman raised her revolver, her hands trembling but her aim steady. One shot struck true. The man spun, dropped. The other ducked behind a fallen pine, reloading. She turned to the cowboy. Two more from the left. I see 'em. They fired together, their gunfire rolling like thunder through the valley. Smoke filled the air, heavy and gray. When the echo faded, only wind answered back. For a moment, neither moved. The woman's hand trembled as she lowered her gun. You think that's all of them? He shook his head slowly. No. The one who talks first ain't the one who matters. She frowned. Then who does? He glanced at the tree line, eyes narrowing. The one who don't talk at all. As if on cue, a shadow shifted behind the rocks below, larger, slower, patient. The cowboy's jaw clenched. Their captain? How do you know? Because he's waiting for me to run. The woman's voice dropped. And you won't. He chambered another round. Not today. The figure below stepped into the open. A man wrapped in a union coat blackened by soot, face hidden by a wide-brim hat. His rifle gleamed, polished, deliberate. The cowboy exhaled once. You stay down. If I fall, you run west. She shook her head. You saved me. I don't leave you. Don't argue, he snapped. I got one bullet left. I'll make it count. Then, before he could aim, the figure below spoke. Cowboy, the voice drawled. You can't save what don't belong to you. The woman froze. I know that voice, she whispered. The cowboy looked at her. Who is he? She swallowed hard. The man who burned my village. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of ash even now. The cowboy raised his rifle. The captain smiled. Come on then. Let's see what mercy looks like with your kind. The cowboy didn't answer. The snow fell quiet again, and between them, the mountain held its breath. The ravine narrowed into shadow. Wind died there, swallowed by stone, and the only sound was the slow, crunching rhythm of boots on snow. The cowboy moved first, rifle low, eyes tracing the slope above. He knew the man would follow the way wolves did, patient, quiet, certain. Behind him, the woman limped, leaning against the frozen rock. She said nothing, but he could hear the shallow catch in her breath. Keep low, he murmured. I can still walk, she replied. I know, he said, but the man hunting us don't miss twice. They came to a fork in the ravine, one path leading toward the frozen stream, the other climbing toward a jagged ridge of black stone. He hesitated, scanning the rock face. Then he pointed upward. Higher ground, she frowned. He'll see us. Good, he said. Let him. They climbed. The snow slipped under their boots, and twice she nearly fell. Each time, his hand caught her before the drop. At the top, they found a small ledge overlooking the valley. Below them the captain appeared, dark coat against pale snow, his stride slow and deliberate, as though he were walking to a grave he'd already dug. The cowboy steadied his rifle. He's alone. No, she whispered. He never hunts alone. A moment later, two more figures emerged from the tree line, silhouettes moving in rhythm, rifles raised. The cowboy exhaled. 3 left. The woman touched his arm. If you fought, Sally shook his head. Ain't my plan. Below, the captain's voice rose, calm, almost friendly. You know what you're carrying, boy. That seal's more than a mark. It's history, it's money, and it ain't yours. The cowboy didn't answer. He watched the man's every step, the way his hand never left the trigger, the way his shadow bent wrong against the light. The captain continued, smiling faintly. I knew your kind in the war. Boys with too much guilt, not enough sense, always dragging ghosts behind 'em. The woman tensed. "Don't listen," he whispered. "I ain't." But the captain's words crawled anyway, slow and poisonous. "You think saving her fixes anything? You think carrying a savage through the snow makes you clean?" The cowboy's jaw clenched. "You talk too much for a man standing in a grave." The captain laughed. "We'll see whose grave it is." He raised his hand. A signal. Gunfire erupted from below. The cowboy shoved the woman behind a boulder, then fired once, twice. One hunter dropped. The other ducked into the trees. "Reload," he muttered. "I only have one left," she said, fumbling with the revolver. "Make it count." She nodded, her breath clouding in front of her face. Another shot whined past, splintering rock. Snow sprayed across them like shrapnel. The cowboy shifted, leaning out just long enough to spot the glint of a rifle barrel near the ridge. He fired, then ducked back as another bullet hissed past his ear. "They're moving up," she said. "I see it. They'll pin us." He looked at her, really looked, and said quietly, "Then we change the plan." Before she could answer, he slung his rifle over his shoulder, grabbed the length of rope coiled at his belt, and tied it around her wrist. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Going down," he said. "You'll die." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but he's expecting me to hide, not to walk into his teeth." She gripped the rope, eyes blazing. "You can't fight him alone." "I ain't fighting him," he said. "I'm distracting him." Then, before she could stop him, he lowered himself down the rock face, boots digging into the ice, rope sliding through her hands. The captain saw him halfway down and smiled. "There you are." The cowboy dropped the last few feet, landing hard in the snow. He raised his rifle, voice steady. "You wanted the seal. Come take it." The captain tilted his head. "You first." He fired, the bullet slicing past the cowboy's shoulder. The cowboy rolled behind a fallen log, firing back. The shot caught the second hunter in the leg. He went down screaming. The captain kept walking, slow, deliberate, as if bullets couldn't touch him. "How you know what she is, don't you?" The cowboy's voice came rough. "She's the one who lived." "She's the one who burned it," the captain said, smiling wider now. "Her village, her own. She lit it herself to keep us from taking it. That's what your hero saved, and a killer." The cowboy froze. "You lie." "She told you she was tied to a post," the captain said softly. "Ask her who put her there." The woman's voice rang from above, fierce and shaking. "Don't listen to him." But the seed was already in the cowboy's mind, twisting. The captain took another step forward, raising his rifle. "You can still walk away, boy. Drop the gun. Leave her. You'll sleep better." The cowboy stared at him, chest rising slow. Then he said, "You're right about one thing." The captain frowned. "What's that?" "I ain't sleeping till one of us don't wake." He fired. The shot echoed through the valley, swallowed by wind and stone. When the smoke cleared, the captain staggered, not dead but hit. He fell to one knee, blood darkening the snow. The woman scrambled down the slope, slipping, breath ragged. She reached the cowboy just as the captain lifted his gun again. Her revolver cracked once. The captain fell back, eyes open, mouth frozen mid-word. For a long time, none of them moved. The snow began to fall again, soft and slow. The cowboy finally turned to her. "He said you burned it." She met his gaze. "I did." He didn't speak. Her voice shook. "They were inside. I begged them to leave. They wouldn't. Better ashes than chains." He nodded slowly, the weight of her truth sinking like stone. "Then we make sure no one rebuilds it." She looked at him, snow catching in her hair. "You still carry me?" "Through winter," he said. "Through whatever comes next." And they turned, away from the body, away from the fire in their past, walking into the storm together, the seal heavy in her hand, the promise heavier still. The thaw began slow, first a whisper, then a trickle, then the sound of ice surrendering to earth. By dawn, the world had changed its skin. Snowmelt streamed down the ridges, carving small rivers where silence used to lie. The cowboy leaned against a pine, watching the water roll past. Steam rose from his breath, his coat hung heavy, torn from the fight, and the rifle across his knees gleamed dull in the light. Behind him, the woman stirred beside a dying fire, the seal resting near her hand like a secret that refused to sleep. "You ever think winter was trying to bury us?" she asked. He looked back. "Then spring just dug us up again." She smiled faintly. "Maybe it's not done." He glanced at the valley below. "Neither are they." Down the slope, dark figures moved between trees, distant, small, but there, a remnant of the captain's men. They hadn't come for revenge. They'd come for proof. "We'll need higher ground," he said. She stood, pulling her shawl close. "There's an old trail above the ridge. My people used it before the soldiers came." He nodded. "Then that's where we go." They packed in silence, what little remained of food, a single lantern, the half-burned ledger they'd taken from the captain's coat. The wind was softer now, but it carried the smell of mud and gunpowder. As they climbed, the land changed, ice giving way to mud, mud to grass, and grass to open rock where nothing grew. Ravens followed, calling like omens. By midday, they reached a clearing cut into the mountain face. A rusted crossbeam jutted from stone, marking what once had been a mine. The woman stopped, tracing the wood with her fingers. "My father worked here before they took the land." He looked at her. "Quiet. You want to stop?" "No," she said. "I want to remember." They entered the mine. The air was thick, cold, damp with dripping stone. Each step echoed like footsteps from another time. Halfway through, she froze. "Hear that?" The cowboy stilled. Somewhere deep within, a low creak, a wood under strain, then a rumble. He pushed her back just as the roof shifted, dust exploding around them. A support beam snapped, blocking the way they came. She coughed, waving away the dust. "We're trapped." He looked around, eyes scanning the dark. "No, we dig." He struck a match, lighting the lantern. The flame flickered against the walls, revealing carvings, old, shallow, worn by time. Names, symbols, and one word repeated in Apache script: free. She touched it with trembling fingers. They carved this before they sealed it shut. "A warning, or a promise," he said. He grabbed a broken plank and started clearing the debris. She joined him, her hands raw, nails tearing, both of them breathing hard as they dug through rock and splinters. Minutes stretched into hours. The air grew thin. At last, the woman slumped against the wall. "We won't make it," she whispered. The cowboy set down the plank, breathing heavy. "You think that's how I carry folks through winter? Quitting halfway?" She smiled weakly. "You talk too much for someone dying. Helps me forget I'm tired." He grabbed the lantern, studied the narrow crack of daylight breaking through near the far side. "There. We're close." Together they crawled toward it, pushing dirt with their hands. When the last stone gave way, light burst in, sharp, blinding. They stumbled out onto the ridge, gasping. Below them, the valley was green now, early shoots of spring pushing through frost, streams running silver. The woman dropped to her knees, laughing softly through her exhaustion. "We're out." The cowboy scanned the horizon. Not yet. Across the valley, the riders had reached the foothill. She followed his gaze. "How many?" "4," he said. "Maybe 5. They won't stop." He turned to her, his face streaked with dirt and ash. "Then neither do we." She lifted the seal, turning it in her hand. "You could leave me now. You'd live." He shook his head. "I didn't carry you to drop you on dry ground." She stared at him, at the man who had crossed winter, bled for strangers, burned his map for a dying woman. "Why?" He looked at her, eyes dark but steady. "Because I've been left behind once. Never again." The words hung there, heavy and true. Below, thunder rolled, not from the sky, but hooves. The cowboy checked his rifle, loading the last 2 rounds. "Cliff's narrow," he said. "We hold 'em here." She nodded, jaw set. "Then they'll fall with us." He glanced at her and for the first time smiled. Small, weary, certain. Not today. As the riders closed in, the wind rose again, carrying dust and rain together, a storm born from Thor. The first drop struck the ground like sparks. The cowboy knelt, whispered a few words to the earth, not prayer, not curse, just thanks. The woman took her place beside him, revolver steady. Behind them, the mine mouth breathed one last sigh, collapsing into itself, sealing the past. Ahead of them, Thunder came closer. He said softly, "Let's finish this climb." The ridge became a battlefield of silence. Wind whipped through the pines, carrying the smell of smoke and thawed earth. The cowboy knelt behind a fallen trunk, reloading one bullet at a time. The woman crouched beside him, hair soaked with rain, revolver steady in her hands. "They'll come from the east," she said. He nodded. "They always come from the light." Thunder rolled. Then came the riders, dark shapes cresting the ridge, rifles flashing through rain. The cowboy fired first, the shot cracking like dry wood. One man fell from his horse and swallowed by the slope. The rest kept coming. The woman turned, voice low. "We can't hold here forever." He glanced toward the cliff behind them. "Don't plan to—" Another bullet screamed past, tearing bark from the tree beside them. The cowboy shifted position, pressing the rifle tight to his shoulder. He counted the echo, 1, 2, 3, before firing again. "2 down," he said. "How many left?" He checked the ridge. "Too many." Lightning split the sky, painting the valley in white. For a moment, the riders were clear, a half circle tightening around them. The cowboy breathed through his teeth. "They're boxing us in." She looked at the ground below. "There's a drop, maybe 20 feet. He shook his head. "No footing." "Better than a bullet," she said. He met her eyes, defiant, steady, then nodded. "We jump when I say—" Another volley ripped through the storm. Bullets hissed through branches, sending splinters into their skin. The cowboy pulled her down, shielding her with his coat as rain turned to hail. "On my mark," he whispered. The riders drew closer, shouting orders lost to Thunder. The lead man raised his rifle. The barrel gleamed silver. "Now!" The cowboy grabbed her hand, and they ran. Mud slid beneath their boots, wind tearing at their clothes. The ridge fell away beneath them, a flash of sky, a rush of cold air, then the crash of bodies against half-frozen earth. They rolled, tangled, breath knocked out. When the world stopped spinning, he was already on his knees, pulling her up. "You alive?" "Barely. Good enough." Above them, the riders reined in their horses at the cliff's edge. Shots rained down, wild, desperate. Bullets struck stone, sparks flying. The cowboy fired upward once, forcing them to scatter. "They won't risk the drop," he said. She steadied her breath. "Then they'll go around." He nodded grimly. "Which means we've got minutes." They moved fast through the hollow, slipping between boulders, stumbling over roots slick with rain. The ground leveled out into a ravine, the stream roaring beside them. He stopped. "Here." She frowned. "Here what?" He pointed to the stream. "We cross. Lose our tracks." They waded in, the water biting cold. Each step numbed their legs, but they kept going until the current pulled their scent clean. On the far side, she collapsed against a rock, gasping. The woman collapsed against a rock, gasping for air, her fingers blue from the cold. The cowboy crouched beside her, scanning the horizon, eyes narrowed against the rain. The ridge above was empty now, but he knew better than to trust silence. "They'll track us by the creek," he said. She nodded, still catching her breath. "Then we keep moving." He helped her stand, his hand firm on her arm. "You lead. You know these lands better than I do." She hesitated. "You trust me after what he said." He looked at her, eyes dark, steady. "I trust what I've seen." They moved through the ravine, boots sloshing through mud and water. Each step was heavier, but the storm covered their trail, wind erasing every sign they'd passed. They found a small hollow beneath an overhang, just enough shelter to light a flame. The cowboy knelt, striking flint, coaxing life from damp kindling. The woman watched, shivering, her lips pale. When the fire caught, she whispered, "You could have left me." He didn't look up. "Could have left a lot of things." She stared at the flame. "And did you?" He paused, then said quietly, "Once." She understood without asking who. Outside, thunder grumbled across the valley, the smell of rain mixed with wood smoke and blood. She turned the seal over in her hand, tracing the broken edge. "When this melts," she said, "the trails will open again. The soldiers will come back." He met her gaze. "Then we find somewhere the trails don't reach." You think that place exists? He gave a faint smile. I ain't found one yet, but I keep looking. A moment passed, still, heavy, almost peace. Then a sound, faint, distant, a horse's whinny. The cowboy froze. They circled faster than I thought. He doused the flame with his boot. Time to move. They slipped back into the rain, keeping low, the forest a blur of grey and green. Behind them came the clatter of hooves, closer now, echoing through the hollow. The woman turned. They've split. He nodded. Two front, two behind, they're herding us. To where? He scanned ahead, then stopped. A wall of rock, slick and high, no way forward. She looked at him, breath trembling. Now what? He studied the cliff face, rough, jagged, but climbable. Up, she stared. In this storm. You want another choice? She shook her head. No. He slung the rifle across his back and began climbing, hands gripping wet stone. The woman followed, her feet slipping twice, catching herself only by sheer will. Rain poured harder, blinding, freezing. Halfway up, a bullet struck near her hand, shattering rock. She gasped, losing her footing. The cowboy grabbed her wrist, pulling her up against the cliff. Don't look down, he said. I wasn't planning to. They climbed higher, hearts pounding, fingers bleeding. Another shot rang out, closer this time. The cowboy turned, firing blind into the storm. The reply was a scream, then silence. By the time they reached the top, both were shaking. The world below was a sea of fog and thunder. The woman collapsed to her knees, coughing. They'll still come. Then they'll climb, he said. She stared at him, rain streaking down her face. Why do you keep fighting? He answered without looking at her. Because someone once carried me through winter. I never got to thank her. The wind howled, carrying his words away. Below, torches flickered faintly. The riders had reached the cliff's base. The cowboy checked his rifle. We hold 'em here. The woman rose, revolver in hand. Then we finish this. He nodded once. The first torch began to rise. The storm gathered its breath, and the ridge prepared for blood. Lightning split the ridge apart. The earth shook, a deep groan running through the mountain's chest. Stones rolled loose, tumbling toward the valley like the world itself was trying to bury the fight. The cowboy fell to one knee, mud sliding under him. Move! He shouted. The woman grabbed the seal, stumbled forward. Behind them, the ridge cracked, a line of fire where rain met fractured stone. They're still climbing, she gasped. He turned. 3 riders clung to the cliff face, torches swaying like dying stars. They won't stop, she said. He aimed, fired once. One torch went dark, swallowed by the fall. Then neither do we. Another rumble rolled beneath their boots. The ground pitched sideways. The woman cried out as a fissure split the ridge between them. Jump! He yelled. She leapt, fingers grazing his. Missed. Her body slid, catching on a root jutting from the edge. Mud poured around her like water through fingers. Hold on, he shouted. I can't. He dropped to his stomach, stretching his arm as the root cracked under her weight. The seal slipped from her grasp, vanishing into the dark below. No, she cried. He caught her wrist just as the root snapped. Their hands locked, her breath ragged, his jaw clenched. Don't you let go, he growled, tears mixed with rain on her face. It's gone. I didn't carry you for a damn piece of metal. With a final pull, he dragged her over the edge, both collapsing hard against the wet stone. For a moment, neither moved, just the sound of rain and distant thunder. She turned to him, voice trembling. Without the seal, there's no proof. He looked out toward the valley. Maybe proof ain't what saves people. Before she could answer, a new sound, the crack of wood, the groan of falling earth. The ridge behind them gave way, sending a wall of rock cascading toward the men below. Screams echoed, then silence. The storm swallowed everything. When it was done, the world was still again. The cliff where the riders had climbed was gone, buried under a mountain's worth of ruin. The cowboy stood, chest heaving. They're done. The woman stared at the wreckage. So is the seal. He nodded. Then it's clean. No one owns what's buried. She looked at him. the faintest smile through exhaustion. "You talk like the land listens." He shrugged. "Maybe it does. Maybe it's just tired of being written on." They turned from the cliff, limping toward the tree line. The rain had softened now, falling like breath instead of punishment. After a long silence, she said, "You think it ends here?" He shook his head. "Things like this don't end. They fade." The woman looked back once when at the broken ridge, the vanished seal, the graves made by thunder, then let it fade quiet. He adjusted his hat, voice low. "Quiet's the best we ever get." They walked on until the storm behind them became memory, faint, almost merciful. And somewhere beneath the mud and stone, the land closed its wounds. The dawn came colorless, grey sky, pale mist, no birds. The storm had left the world washed bare. The trees bowed under ice, and the ridge behind them lay buried, a scar sealed by mud and rain. The cowboy stood at the edge of the clearing, shoulders heavy beneath his torn coat. His breath steamed in the cold morning. The rifle hung loose in his hand, empty now. The woman crouched by the river, rinsing blood from her palms. The water ran red, then clear, then red again. She didn't look up when she said, "It's gone. Everything we crossed for." He watched the current sweep away bits of ice and soil. "Maybe that's the point." Her voice shook. "My people's names were carved into that seal, their lands, their dead, and now—" He stepped closer. "Now the land don't belong to anyone." She turned sharply. "You think that's justice?" He didn't answer. The wind moved through the pines like a whisper too tired to finish a sentence. She rose, walking toward him. "You carried me through the storm. You fought beside me. Why?" He looked past her to the horizon, where the mountains met the low clouds like closed fists. "Because I once watched a woman fall. Didn't move fast enough that time. Been moving ever since." Her face softened. "And did it make you clean?" He smiled, just barely. "No, just colder." They stood in silence. After a while, she reached into her coat and pulled out something, small, broken, mud-stained. The fragment of the seal. "It cracked when it fell," she said. "Didn't break all the way." He took it gently, wiping it with his sleeve. The symbol, faint but still there, caught a glint of morning light. "What'll you do with it?" he asked. She looked toward the river. "Bury it where the water runs. Let it vanish, right?" He nodded. "Good place for ghosts." She smiled faintly. "You believe in ghosts, cowboy?" He met her eyes. "I walk with one." She didn't ask which. They found a patch of soft ground by the bank. Together they dug with their hands, wet earth sticking to their fingers. When the hole was deep enough, she laid the fragment inside, covering it slowly. As the last handful of dirt fell, she whispered something in Apache, words carried off by wind. He stood, hat low, silent beside her. When she was done, she turned to him. "You could leave now. Go where you meant to go." He shook his head. "Ain't anywhere left to go that's mine. You could make somewhere." He smiled, quiet and tired. "Maybe that's your job now." She looked at him, at the man who had lost more than he said and carried more than he should. "Then come see it when it's done." He glanced at the horizon, then back at her. "If the trail's still open—" She extended her hand. He took it, brief, rough, certain. Then they parted, she walking upstream, him down. The mist swallowed them both, two shadows heading in opposite directions through the same silence. The river rolled on, carrying the story the way it carried the thaw, slow, unstoppable, indifferent. The seal slept beneath it, unseen, and for the first time, the land didn't ask for names. The land had thawed by inches. Snow retreated in patches, revealing the bones of trees, the ribs of the earth. Winter wasn't gone, only wounded, lying still beneath its own breath. The cowboy walked slow along the valley, his boots sinking into half-frozen mud. The river followed beside him like an old companion that had forgotten his name. The sound of it, low, steady, reminded him of her voice when the fever took her halfway through the pass, calm even in pain. He'd carried her then, through the storm, through the night that nearly buried them both. And when dawn broke, It had looked like this, colorless, waiting. He reached a ridge overlooking the old trail. From here, the land stretched forever, gray, empty, endless. He took off his hat, ran a hand through his damp hair, and breathed the cold air deep into his lungs. It stung, sharp, clean, alive. Below, in the far distance, smoke rose, a single thread twisting upward from what might have been a campfire or a hearth. He stared a long while. It could have been her. He started walking again. By midday he found tracks, light ones, careful, as if each step asked permission. The snow still held the shape of her moccasins. He crouched, tracing one print with a gloved hand. She'd passed through recently, hours, maybe less. He followed, through birch and pine, through the scent of thaw and ash, until the forest opened to a wide clearing. There stood the half-burnt cabin he'd once called shelter, now rebuilt, the roof patched with bark and hides, smoke whispering from a new chimney. He stopped at the edge of the clearing. She stood by the doorway, arms crossed, watching him like she'd been expecting this all along. "You came back," she said. "Didn't have anywhere else to go. You said you'd walk the other way." He shrugged. "Trails change." She smiled faintly, motioning him closer. "Then come see what stayed." He stepped inside. The cabin smelled of cedar and smoke. Animal skins hung near the fire. On the table, a clay bowl of roots and herbs, and beside it, a new carving. He moved closer. The figure was rough but clear, a rider carrying someone across a storm. The base bore a line etched in Apache script. "What's it say?" he asked. She looked at it for a long moment before answering. "It says, 'We lived.'" He nodded. "That's enough." The wind rattled the window once, and gentle, almost like knocking. She turned to him. "You stayed alive out there?" "Mostly." "Why?" He smiled without humor. "Didn't seem right to die when you didn't." Silence filled the cabin, heavy but not cruel. The fire cracked softly, throwing red light against the walls. Finally, she said, "You remember the seal?" He nodded. "Buried it by the river." "I went back," she said. "Water's higher now. It's gone for good." "Good," he said. "Things like that shouldn't have graves." She studied him, his face worn by wind and distance, the lines cut deep around his eyes. "You look older." "I am," he smiled, glancing around. "You made this place stand again." "Not alone," she said. "The child came back. The riders too, not all, but enough." He exhaled, almost smiling. "You built something from ghosts." She tilted her head. "You still carry yours." He looked into the fire. "Always." She stepped closer, slow, deliberate. "Then leave one here." He hesitated. "Ain't sure how." She reached out, took his hand, pressed it to the warmth of the firelight. "Start by not holding it so tight." For the first time, he didn't pull away. Night fell quiet, soft as breath. They sat outside beneath a sky filled with unbroken stars. The ridge behind them glowed faintly with snowlight, the same ridge that had once threatened to swallow them both. She handed him a cup of tea, steam curling between them. "You think the land forgave us?" He sipped, then shook his head. "Land don't forgive, it just keeps on." She nodded. "Then maybe we should too." He looked at her, the firelight on her face, the small scar above her brow, the calm that no storm could erase. "Maybe," he said. The wind moved through the trees, slow and low, carrying a sound like distant drums. Somewhere, deep in the dark, a coyote called, one long note, neither mourning nor celebration, just life continuing. The cowboy leaned back, hat tipping over his eyes. "Winter's near done." "Winter always comes back," she said. He smiled. "So do we." They sat in silence until the fire dimmed, until the stars began to fade into the pale edge of morning. And when the first light touched the horizon, it glimmered on two figures side by side. Neither ghosts nor legends, just survivors who refused to vanish. The ridge behind them stood quiet. The land breathed. And for once, nothing demanded to be written down. The wind shifted before dawn, that thin, hollow whisper that only comes when winter exhales for the last time. The fire in the cabin had died to embers. Smoke rose in lazy curls, slipping through cracks in the roof like memory refusing to settle. The cowboy woke first. He pushed open the door, letting in a rush of cold air. The valley stretched below, blanketed in mist, silver in the first light. For a moment, it looked untouched, like the world before anyone claimed it. He stepped outside, boots sinking into soft earth. His breath came slow, steady. Every sound, the river's pulse, the whisper of wind through thawing grass, felt louder now, more alive. Behind him, the Apache woman emerged from the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, her dark hair heavy with dew. She stood beside him without speaking. They both looked out across the land. No markers, no fences, no scars of war or claim, only open ground. "Looks empty," he said. She shook her head. "No, just quiet." He glanced at her. "Quiet's a dangerous thing out here." She smiled faintly, only to those who fear listening. The sun broke over the ridge then, slow, gold, touching the tops of the trees. The valley lit up, not with glory, but with warmth. Fragile, human warmth, like forgiveness given shape. He breathed deep. Storms finally gone. "It was never the storm," she said softly. "It was the hunger." He looked at her, puzzled. "The hunger to own," she continued. "The land. Say each other's stories. That's what kills." He nodded slowly. "Maybe we're just learning not to feed it." She turned toward the east, where the river wound like a vein through the earth. The water took the seal. The fire took the house. And still, we stand. He smiled, rough but real. "That's enough of a miracle for me." The woman looked down at the dirt near her feet. Something small caught the sunlight, a glimmer half buried in mud. She knelt, brushing it clean. It was metal, thin, broken, but familiar. A fragment of the seal, the one they'd buried. Her breath caught. It came back. The cowboy crouched beside her. Or maybe it never left. She turned it over. The engraved line was faded, but not gone. The symbol, half sun, half river, still caught the light. "What do we do with it?" she asked quietly. He studied it for a long moment. Then he took her hand, placed the fragment in her palm, and closed her fingers around it. "Keep it," he said, "but don't guard it. Let it mean whatever it needs to." She looked at him, eyes steady, voice low. "And what about you?" He smiled, thin but sure. "Me? I'll keep moving. The land's got room enough for ghosts like me." She laughed softly. "Maybe not a ghost anymore." He tipped his hat. "We'll see." They stood there as the sun climbed higher, shadows shrinking, the day warming by degrees. The air smelled of pine and thaw and something new, like the first breath after drowning. Then, in the distance, a bird cried, a sharp call cutting the silence clean in two. Both of them turned toward the sound. It came from across the river, from the far bank. Smoke rose again there, not from ruin, but from life. She smiled. "The riders?" He nodded. "Guess the world don't stop, even when we think it should." For a long time they just stood, side by side, eyes fixed on the smoke, the broken seal between them, the land stretching endless and unclaimed. The cowboy finally spoke, his voice low, certain. "Maybe this is what surviving looks like." The woman answered without looking at him. "No, this is what living looks like." The wind carried their words away, scattering them over open ground where no one would write them down and no one would own their echo. The river kept flowing. The land kept breathing. And somewhere beneath it all, beneath fire, beneath frost, the seal slept again, not as proof or possession, but as memory, because what the land keeps, it keeps without permission. The cowboy turned, walking toward the horizon. She watched him go until the light swallowed his outline, just a figure moving west, leaving behind a world that had finally stopped asking for names. The wind eased, the trees bowed, the valley exhaled, and silence, pure, unbroken, answered back. The sun leaned low against the western rim, melting into the folds of the hills. Shadows stretched long and thin, swallowing fence lines and hollowed posts until they were nothing, until all that stood was earth, raw and level again. The air smelled of dust and thaw, of a promise too tired to speak. The cowboy walked slow, each step sinking soft into the ground. Behind him, the cabin was a shape dissolving into dusk. Smoke rose in a single thread, curling toward the clouds. It wasn't a farewell, more a mark that someone had lived, and that was enough. Ahead, the river shimmered under the last of the light. He stopped at the bank and crouched down. The water ran shallow here, whispering over stones, each sound like a story half told. He let his fingers trail through it, cold and smooth, until they found the soft grit of mud. From his coat pocket, he pulled a small piece of leather, the kind Apache riders used to bind wounds or mark travel. It was worn, torn at the edges, darkened by age. He turned it over in his palm. Her mark was there, stitched into the corner, a sun breaking over a ridge. He stared at it a long time, thumb brushing the thread. Then, slowly, he laid it in the water. The current took it gently, spinning it once before carrying it away, east, toward the lowlands, toward what was gone and what might still be. Behind him, the wind began to rise again. Not harsh, not wild, but steady like breath. The trees swayed, the earth sighed. He stood, watching until the river swallowed the last flicker of leather. A faint sound drifted from somewhere far off. Hooves on frozen ground, then laughter. The riders were moving again. The land was not empty. It never had been. He turned toward the mountains. The trail was rough, half washed out by the storm, but familiar. Every scar in the land matched one he carried in himself. He adjusted his coat, pulled his hat low, and started up the slope. The sky deepened, orange to red, red to violet. Stars began to pulse faintly above, cold and clear. Halfway up the rise, he stopped, looked back one last time. The cabin below was only smoke now. The river only silver. The woman only memory. But it was enough, he whispered. Not prayer, not farewell, just truth. She's still out there. The wind caught it, carried it away. At the top of the ridge, he paused. The horizon spread before him, the same endless stretch that had always waited, unchanging, unclaimed. Somewhere far below, coyotes called, thin, lonely, alive. He watched the sky until the first stars sharpened. His hand brushed the revolver at his hip, empty but still warm from his grip. Then he unbuckled it, dropped it into the dirt. The thud was soft, final. He left it there. No man needed iron where the land no longer took sides. The trail ahead glimmered faintly, washed in moonlight. He walked it slow, each step deliberate, boots sinking deep into the mud that had once been ice. When he reached the crest, the night opened wide. Wind swept through the grass, whispering against his coat, tugging gently, almost like a hand guiding him forward. He looked west, where the earth seemed to end. Then, with a small breath and a breath lighter than regret, he said quietly, "Let it keep us." And he went on. The stars above did not blink, the land below did not move. But somewhere in that stillness, between earth and breath, the story settled, not finished, not forgotten, but at rest. The land remembered, the wind carried it, and silence held it safe. That night, nothing demanded to be written, and still, the land wrote everything. The cowboy's footsteps fade into the dark, but his story, like the land, endures. Because some journeys don't end when the trail does, they echo through the wind, through the fire, through the quiet that comes after. If this story spoke to something in you, that stillness, that hunger for redemption in a world that forgets, then stay with us. Each Apache tale carries a different wound, a different truth buried in dust and silence. And every week, we uncover another one, another act of care, another fight for meaning in a land that refuses to forget. Subscribe to Apache Stories, where the frontier never truly sleeps, and every storm leaves something worth remembering. Because some stories don't just belong to the West, they belong to anyone who's ever carried someone through the winter and kept walking.